Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Today, my guest is one of my favorites, Dr. Erin Fall Haskell. She's the author of Awakening, a 40-day guide to unleashing your spiritual powers, life's purpose, and manifesting your dreams. She's also the founder of the amazing new Thought Global and Soulciéte, where she develops spiritual warriors, certifies coaches, soul entrepreneurs, spiritual practitioners, and doctors of divinity. She also has a great podcast, Live Your Truth, where she discusses universal law, metaphysics of mind, subconscious reprogramming, and so much more. Visit newthoughtglobal.com to learn more about Dr. Erin. And also, Dr. Erin and I are going to be featured speakers in an upcoming awesome free online event called the Ageless Women's Summit. And that is happening October 25th through October 29th. And you can visit the show notes to click the link to register for free. Welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be. I don't think there's anybody in the world I'd rather spend an hour with, hanging with. You're amazing, seriously. And I know all your audience already knows that, but Elle is one of my favorite peeps on this planet, straight up.
Thanks so much. I was just telling Dr. Erin before we got on here that actually I listened to very few podcasts, but hers is one of them. Check it out, Live Your Truth. Incredible episodes. It's often her just talking for 15, 20 minutes, really sets the tone. You have an amazing voice for it, and the content is incredible. And I want to get into some of that content today. But let's start off with, you are a master spiritual psychology coach. You teach people all over the world how to be spiritual coaches, and also one-on-one in terms of your mission, which is really to try to waken up a billion people to their truth and their purpose. So your mission is incredible. And what you've developed with New Thought Global and Soulciéte is incredible. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into sort of some trauma issues, let's talk a little bit about that, about your mission and what you offer through Soulciéte and New Thought Global.
Sure. I just want to acknowledge everybody out there. I think it's a turbulent time. And during times like this, oftentimes people question their value system. And it's an important time for people to birth their value system and get really clear of what their truth is, so that they are unshakable and unstoppable no matter what's going on in the world, whether it be lockdowns or, political things or whatever is out there. So what is possible and what really the mission is to help people awaken. And that sounds a little woo-woo, but really what it is for people to wake up to the truth of who they are, which is, a pure, powerful person that is able to create what they really, really want to experience and be the difference they want to see in the world, truly.
And part of your work is teaching your E4 trauma method, but let's get into trauma. I think it's so important. I want you to talk about big T and little t when it comes to trauma, but also why trauma is sneaky, right? It can affect our present and future, but we may not be totally aware that something might be traumatic that we need to heal, and why healing, unresolved trauma is really the key.
Oh my gosh, this is like my heart of heart. So for me personally, I feel like trauma is the key of the secret, if you will. And I'm sure everybody listening to this probably has done a ton of self-development work. And for me, I was one of those seekers of truth. I didn't really have any answers. I was a hot mess. That's the truth. I came from really no stability growing up, not really into principles, zero religion. And I just didn't know what the hell we were doing on this planet, truly. And for me, as I began to dive into self-development, began to look at some of the distinctions, taking every seminar under the sun, reading books, doing all of it. It was all good. It started kind of like making some sense, but it wasn't until I began to dive into epigenetics and the subconscious mind and what was really going on, because I don't know about anyone out there, but for me, I had watched the documentary, The Secret, and you either love The Secret or you hate The Secret. Like, let's just get it straight. But regardless, we're all asking, how do we actually manifest, right? We want to know that truth, right? And I remember for me, there was some areas in my life that I could absolutely manifest, wealth, and I had become a self-made millionaire by the time I was 30, but I was still sad inside, right? And there was other parts of my area of my life where I couldn't manifest at all, like stay relationship. I was dealing with codependency and just kind of dysfunctional relationships. And I thought, what's wrong with me, right? And regardless, we usually fall into one of those categories. We're either able to manifest, but we still feel like something's missing, or we're not able to manifest what we want. And we're kind of like, what's wrong with us? Right. So for me, the key to the secret, if you will, was discovering how trauma impinges upon the subconscious mind, which is really the subjective mind, which is one with universal mind, which is actually why the beliefs within our soul won't allow us to either manifest what we want, or we manifest what we think we want because of some identity, but we don't actually get what we need, which is love and connection and expression.
Before we go into some other trauma examples, let's talk about money trauma. You did a great money breakthrough series on your podcast, Live Your Truth. I think it was about 12 episodes, and I really recommend everyone go and listen to that. But since you mentioned money, you glossed over what people think is very impressive. You saved $1 million in your 20s, but it wasn't. And I guess our friend Rob Mack would chime in and go, yep, well, above $80,000,
yeah, right.
It doesn't matter on your happiness. So that's very interesting. When I hear people who are like, it's so unfair. This guy, Joe, he's such a jerk of a human being, but he's worth millions of dollars. And I go, nope, it's totally fair. He's thinking right about money. Doesn't mean he has healthy relationships, right? Doesn't mean he likes himself or is healthy. He's just thinking right about that. So let's talk about money trauma, for example, before we get into some classics, because I think people don't realize they have little and big T traumas around money.
It's so fascinating. First, I do want to give a big shout out to Rob Mack, because we both are obviously good friends. Rob Mack was a co-host with me on Good Morning La Land, and Elle, of course, was on our show. And we just want to give a big shout out to him, happiness coach. And he recognized, the stats around money, which means they say that something to the extent of anything over $80,000. And basically, when you have your basic needs met, it doesn't mean that you're going to be more happy if you have more money. We recognize even through the Harvard study that it comes down to relationships and having really good community and relationship, which is the key factor for people to have fulfilling lives. But so,
and on that note, I do want to chime in and just say, in the area of self-esteem, it's the same thing. I was speaking to Mark Leary, PhD, had a discussion with him in my book, Confident as Fuck. And he talked about how, you can have self-esteem by not being anything in this world, by just feeling like you're a wonderful friend and people like you. You don't need to have some, right, big business or anything else. It can be from a small thing like that.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so good. So let's get back to money and trauma. What it's so weird, right? What does trauma have to do with money? Like, I'm like having a little face over here. So we recognize that money, obviously, is worthless, the actual physical money, right? It's a man-made concept that can change every day of what it's worth, right? So money comes down to one thing when I'm working with, whether it be a celebrity, a CEO, a single mom, or the girls that I develop now and certify as spiritual, spiritually master coaches and things like that. So it comes down to obviously trauma a lot, because it comes down to self-worth. So for example, there was a gal that I was taking through a trauma session. And one of her trauma was when she was a little girl, her dad and her mother got into a big argument in front of her. And her dad left. And he left. And basically they were having a fight over, her dad had been working a lot and her mother was really frustrated. And they got in a big argument and her dad left. And she was traumatized by the actual argument. And then when the door slammed, she had this huge thing that basically the command was basically that money equals abandonment. And so for her rest of her life, for a lot of time, what we call a command. So what happens is the trauma doesn't happen by actually what happens. She wasn't traumatized by the actual argument or far living. She was actually traumatized. What happens from an emotional standpoint is it's actually the meaning that we put on what does or doesn't happen. And the subconscious mind is actually programmed by the vibration of the emotion, right? So you put a positive or a negative meaning on what does or does not occur, and you instantaneously have a positive or negative emotion. So here she was as a little girl. She has this, argument that she's witnessing. She puts the meaning that it's bad. She gets high state of a charged state in her consciousness, a lot of frequency going on, vibration, and she decides, I'm not lovable, right? She decides love equals abandonment. I'm sorry, money equals abandonment. And so this was a command and a concept that stayed in her subconscious mind, which we call a command that plays out like puppet strings. So what happened is every time that she would begin to make money, she would begin to push people away and out of her life. So it became this like, you can either have money and not have love, or you get, or you get love and you can't have the money.
So was that, just to clarify, I'm assuming it's like sort of I'm pushing you away because then you can't abandon me. I'm going to do it first.
Yes, it's like a subconscious sabotage system. Right, exactly. So for her, we had to take her through some trauma processes and neutralize the commands and neutralize the mental pictures, going back through almost like a reverie into the actual incident that happened. And as you neutralize it, as you keep going back over it, then you begin to actually recognize the commands. And we take them through what's called an E4 trauma method that I created. And the difference between that trauma method versus other is that we call it the path to enlightenment. Because one thing to neutralize the commands or the actual kind of reactionary upset triggers versus there's a wisdom to come out of it. So what ended up happening with this woman is she actually began to have a calling to help women begin to love money, to love it and really make peace with it and be able to have it. And she ended up making a career out of it.
I love that so much. When I think about some money trauma, it was, for me, it was, my father was, very wealthy growing up. Parents were established. And back then, it was sort of the thing where like, okay, the mom stays at home and that's going to be the situation. And that's sort of what my parents had sort of decided. And then he basically just was a stockbroker and blew all of our money, became a drunk, but it was really the money thing. And at that time I made a declaration and I was like, this is what can happen. You can date a guy, everything looks good. They might be, quote, stable, have some money or, have a secure life and background. And yet one day you could lose it all. And then they leave you in the dust, to support the kids and never show up. And I, at that point, was like, I'm never going to rely on a man because they can always bail and I'm not going to be in that situation. So, that led down a road of attracting people who continually confirmed that until I dealt with that and kind of went back to that initial statement, that declaration I made.
Yes. And it's fascinating because money, sometimes it's not anything of what we think it is. It doesn't necessarily have to do with money. It has to do with self-worth. And that's really what money comes down to is, do we believe we're worthy? Do we believe we're worthy of being supported? Do we and meaning like if we have enough money, we're able to actually feed ourselves good food and have, good medical care and have a beautiful home? Are we really worthy of having a life that supports us in our expression and really in our health and in all the other areas of our life? So it's a really, money is, I think, such a fascinating conversation because money represents so much. It's different for every person. Money has so much charge around it for people.
Yeah. And, on that note, this is exactly why lottery winners often lose all their money because they don't have that, right? They don't have that built-in proper worthiness about it. So they end up giving it away or they don't feel worthy in some way and it's projected into where they lose it all. And that's that goes to exactly what you're saying about it.
Yeah. Michael Bernard Beckwith has an incredible kind of story or metaphor analogy around it, which is he has the story of two gentlemen and one has the consciousness of prosperity and he can go out and buy a car and either make those payments or pay in full or whatever it is and has a car. And then he talks about a criminal and how a criminal does not have the consciousness of prosperity, and he'll have to go out and steal a car and he can't keep the car because he can't maintain the car and so it's just the consciousness. Can you actually have it? And I think that we've all experienced having glimpses of prosperity or things coming through or amazing people, but when we hadn't done our inner work, we can't have it. We'll sabotage it anyway. We can't have it because we don't have the mental equivalent vibrational match of whatever that is. So doing the trauma work is really taking all those sabotaging things in the subconscious mind that just won't allow you to actually have it or keep it, or also will not even just let you even you'll have it, but you won't be able to be fulfilled.
Mm-hmm. And this work that you do is really great, of course, for coaches. You're coaching coaches, and coaching them to be coaches. But for the ones that are already coaches, this is an important element. I mean, how many times have you or I spoken to someone or a client who's having issues with raising their rates? And what I realized is until I really raised mine to where I felt it was matching my worth and what I was giving and putting out there, what was strange is that I thought, I was playing in this world of what I thought the going rate, right? You have that like, oh, well, what's the going rate? It's like, it's whatever you want it to be. Really, there is going to be someone that will show up and give it to you, supply demand, but also really you put it out there. And so what do you have to say for some of the coaches and people thinking about getting into that who are struggling with either raising their rates and all that stuff?
Girl, I got so much to say on this.
Oh, I know.
I mean, seriously. I mean, I think universal law teaches us everything, right? We can just look at nature and we can understand how things work. Universal law teaches us that we have to give whatever we seek, right? If we want love, we have to give love. If we want money, we have to give value. It's like coaching. Coaching is such a I love our industry so much because as a doctor of divinity, and I still consider myself a coach because it's just, what are we actually doing? Let's just face the fact. And it's not old school coaching of like, oh, you need to do this and build a habit and all that. It's like, it's so subconscious. But so money's great because oftentimes we'll come upon people, they want to get trained as a coach and they want to become and get high paying clients, but they're not willing to pay for a coach. Like, how do you think in any right mind that makes any sense? If you want to get high paying clients, you've got to be willing to pay. You want to become a high paying coach, but you're not willing to pay for, a coach. It doesn't make any sense, right? So if we want to have our clients be decisive, we have to be decisive, right? It's just life is a mirror every time. And it's so funny because we just doubled our prices in our program. One, we were way below because we had put them down for some of the lockdown and COVID and stuff. But we were way out of integrity with ourselves, meaning that we actually were doing a disservice for our clients because we weren't charging enough. And therefore, they actually weren't valuing it as much. It's funny because when you actually put your prices up, which really should be in alignment with the benefit, not the time exchange, but the benefit and the results that people get out of the program. And as soon as we raised our prices, it was interesting because people began to get more results as well because they valued it more. It's so funny.
Oh,
right?
That's happened so many times where, over the years, even maybe a friend of a friend, a good friend has a thyroid problem. And I've, been like, okay, we'll do a vibrational exchange of money on this as a favor. I even do that just because I want them to pay something. But in the times where I used to do it purely for free for a few people here and there, again, they don't value it as much. They don't take it as seriously. It's so interesting, that dynamic.
And don't you feel now like it's such an honor to pay somebody for their service? It's like, I give in gratitude. I'm like, think about this person of how much time, effort, decades they've put into their expertise. And I'm so honored that they're willing to share their wealth of wisdom or their genius in my company or whatever it is. And I think, man, I don't think we really get it. In our culture, like we have geniuses that have spent decades, like marketers that have been obsessed for, decades. And then we're like having a hard time paying them for their genius. Like we can't afford to not pay them for their genius.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get back to some general traumas, things out there. I know you've had some in your life, of course, but you've got like big T, little t. Can you give us a couple of examples for people out there that might not even recognize that there might be something to look at? I mean, I think the money example was great because that was just sort of like an argument with her parents that ended pretty badly, but wow, did it affect her life for years?
Well, what we've found is that most people think that trauma is just if you're in a war or a car accident. And that is not what we're talking about. Those are they equally have the significance on the subconscious mind. It doesn't matter if it was someone looked at you cross-eyed on the jungle gym as a kid, or if you had a breakup, or if you were raped, or if you were in a war. The emotions are the same. The emotions as how upset you are and the high frequency of the upset, of the meaning that you put on, that's creating that high state of emotion and charge. And it is in that decision and what happens in the moment of the traumatic incident, in that high state of negative emotion. It's actually it's a lie. It's actually a divisive, limited belief perception done by a command that sets an engram into the neurological system and actually tags the DNA. So the actual DNA gets strangled, if you will, and all the trauma of all your lifetimes comes through in your consciousness, which is also on your DNA. And so what's fascinating is, yes, there's big T's and little T's as far as bigger traumas and smaller traumas, but from a spiritual, energetic perspective, there's zero difference in that there's only being extra upset and commands that are deeper in consciousness versus not. And so it's really up to the individual of their ability to create their own bounds and their own limitations.
Can you give us an example or two of some people that have done some 180s who may not have either known they had a trauma that they had to resolve or had one and just ignored it and then finally dealt with it? Yes, I know you have hundreds of them, thousands.
Yeah. So, what's interesting is we have all kinds and all levels, but a few that stick out in my mind, because I know you deal a lot with health. And I think that, look, I can't say that this can cure anything legally, okay? But I've witnessed miracles. I'm just going to say that, okay? But please reach out and have your own professional advice and seek your own medical doctor and own whatever. But for example, there was a woman, she was dealing with chronic illness. She had even gone as far as having sepsis and gone into the hospital, I think, for like 40 days, and just so constant, like chronic disease in her life. And when we began to go into the trauma work, there was some major incidents as a little girl, one in particular where she basically had, an upset with her mother, and her mother was yelling at her or whatever. And she decided the command that she had was, I've got to get better. Mm. And the subconscious mind just takes the command literally. I've got to get better, which meant she always had to not be well, right? So it played out in such a profound way in her life. And as she began to do that trauma work and release it, she looked like a different human being instantaneously. You could feel the life come back into her, knowing that nothing's wrong with her. She's not this body. She's not the belief. And we only have perfect health, meaning that there's perfect health because it's a perfect cause and effect of what we've created in consciousness. But in accepting that and in knowing the perfection of that, a new possibility is born. And the new possibility is that she doesn't have to resist it. And in that, her body began to not have stress around the illness, and it began to heal itself.
I love that. How did you, or tell us your own personal codependency, how you had to work through that? Because, you saved $1 million and then you were like, damn it, I'm still a mess.
Right.
Here, right. We all have that. It's like, I was confident in every area of my life, except over here where I had shame about my hand disability and I had to go deal with that in order to kind of wrap things up. Right. So, you were able to, manifest and save money, but yet you were a mess, and you said you were attracting codependent relationships. Tell us how you worked through that or what happened there.
Yeah, it was really fascinating. Here I was a self-made millionaire living in a 7,400 square foot home, jetting around, doing whatever. I was so into my spiritual work. I was, working with all kinds of teachers and getting developed. And I was even had some clients, and yet I was in a very dysfunctional relationship. And I had so much shame around it, Elle, because I was like, how can I be doing all this work and still be in a dysfunctional codependent relationship? And it was like, I just was judging the hell out of myself and so ashamed and in the closet about it. And for me, it was my kind of final masterclass, if you will, in that, of course, I had to go into a lot of trauma work and really release my command, which was, I'm not lovable for sure. And I would constantly pull in unavailable, completely dysfunctional human beings, pretty much. And I think that for me, it was the masterclass of self-love. And so often actually working with coaches that are being developed, I would say it's one of the final kind of, because they think about this under most addictions and things. Codependency is kind of like the core issue, meaning that if you're really actually living on spiritual principle, you're really living the most empowered you can be. You would never put your power outside of yourself. And for most of us, we still put our love in relationship as our higher power. And therefore, we're always kind of like a roller coaster in our relationships. We're always kind of ups and downs and pointing the finger and thinking they're the source of my unhappiness or they're the source of my joy, because you can't have one without the other. The moment that you assign somebody as your joy, you instantaneously assign them as your suffering as well. So for me, it was a master class of self-love, and how I healed it was not only by trauma, but one of the key factors was to recognize that I still loved him. regardless of not being able to be him, with regardless of him cheating on me, regardless of whatever, and knowing that I would not be in a relationship, I still unconditionally love him. And that was the thing that finally freed me.
I love it. I thought about something that came up in one of my group coaching sessions where we were talking about just judgment. And I'm sure you've heard this before too. I'll just throw it out there where, let's say you've been through something tough in life and you've overcome it. And then someone comes along and is talking about their trauma or their traumatic situation, and it seems really light, and you kind of judge it like, oh, come on, right? You know what I'm saying? Where people would look at that and go, really? Like, that's nothing. You should see what I went through. That, we got to get out of that. But here's what I say, and it's really kind of goes back to what you said earlier about, meanings we put onto things, right? Two people may be in the same scenario, and that person who you think has a joke trauma, it's ridiculous, like a broken nail or whatever you're tossing off. Yeah. And then you would say, but maybe they had an even more profound traumatic experience than you did with your crazy trauma, like, your laundry list that everyone thinks is a big T. So let's talk a little bit about that. Because I think often we go, really? Like, rolling our eyes, at someone else's trauma, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I just want to recognize you. I mean, you're such a beautiful woman, and you give so much, and you always show up, and you're so authentic. And thank you for bringing up this topic, because I think it's really real, especially as, two women that people can go, oh, well, you guys have it good. You're both, good looking, you've had success. Well, of course you can do it, right? And it's all relative. Being in a room with, say, 300 people going through transformation after a long weekend or something, and diving into people's traumas and driving into everything. The reality is that at the core of all of us, we're one, first of all. That is our core principle, is oneness. Secondly, we all have the same core trauma command, which is, I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. Every last one of us. And that's part of being a human. It's never going to go away fully. It will be a charge that stays in us because we're one. And until we're all, healed in that, it will live in all of us at some extent. And I agree. I think that it's relative. Somebody, they could be broken up by somebody that they went out with for a few months, and it's absolutely life devastating. And people are like, so what? You weren't even married. Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, so right. It's just relative. It's all relative, every last drop of it.
And that goes to, again, like, two people growing up in the same household and one having an entirely different perspective on what that meant to them, putting that meaning on them. What are some of the common themes that you find? I mean, we've talked about a couple of them with, coaches being maybe hesitant on paying for coaches. What are some of the things that have come up? You've dealt with thousands of women and people and coaches all over the world. What are some of these classic ones that come up that are blocking people from moving forward, whether it's being on a coach or dealing with trauma or getting their abundance mindset in order, et cetera?
This is it's such divine timing, because I actually am in love with quote sales right now, in what happens in a psychological perspective of it, which is really fascinating. So what happens, and I'm sure you've come across this because we're in the coaching world. So we get invited to things, and at some point in time, someone will present something in some kind of a pitch or presentation or something like that. And we have the place where, like, oh, should I sign up for that, or should I join that, or should whatever? And what happens internally for all of us is everything in our psyche comes up that wants to keep us where we're at in our comfort level and whatever level we're at in our life. So we like, whether it be that you're signing up for your first coach for that $3,000 program, or whether you're someone like me that, right, we sign up for people that for $10,000 that do marketing without any ad spend, right? It's like, no matter what you're at, you're going to have a place where you need to go out of your comfort zone. And whenever you're going out of your comfort zone, it's the most amazing thing that happens, because everything that wants to hold you back will come up. So for example, for one person, it'll be money. For another person, it'll be time. For another person, it will be, they just don't believe that it'll actually work for them, right? For another person, it's going to be, well, I'm in a relationship and maybe it won't work for them to have me be busy every single week in a course or something like that, right? Whatever it is that comes up for you, that is the exact thing that's holding you back and keeping you small in life.
You touched on it, but the unknown is where it's at. It's just scary. We want to stay with what we know. And like, it's just the good stuff is there. And I see it all the time with confidence, where people will make a very small step. To other people out there, it may be like, that's ridiculous. Why would you even have a problem doing that? But for other people, sometimes even just, telling your hairdresser you want a new cut is a tough move for them to speak up. It's no different than something big for those people. And then you see people make one move, speak up once in a very small way, and the cascade. And this is what this is what I believe, which is when you do a pro you move in any kind of way, you get prizes. You just get prizes. And all of the prizes that came from this one girl just speaking up for something. And then it cascaded into all of these like incredible manifestations, right? Including money and all sorts of stuff. And I was like, look at where it all came from. You finally just stepping up once, to speaking up once when you felt like it, but didn't. And then you did it. And then look what unfolded.
It's so good. Last night, I was at this great event down in San Diego. I'd been invited down. There was a big marketing, I think it's called, what's it called? It skipped my mind right now, but it was 5,000 people at this marketing event. And I wasn't at the marketing event, but I was invited to this dinner on a boat with a lot of the big, amazing conscious influencers. John Assaraf was sitting across from me at dinner, who's been on my show, and beautiful. His family and his wife are amazing.
Yeah, he's lovely.
He's lovely. And he was saying, because somehow we got in the conversation of abundance, and he said, the universe you can never outgift the universe. You know what I mean? And it's just like what you said. And that's what I love about our industry is anytime I've paid for a coach or paid for that genius in marketing or paid for whatever, it's always come back tenfold. And that's the law of tithing. Tithing is not about giving 10% of your income per se to a church. And we're not a traditional church. We're do spirituality. But the point is they miss the point of the law. The point of the law is that wherever we give our treasure, our time, or our talent has to come back tenfold. And that works also in negativity. You can put it towards dysfunction, and your life is going to have 10 times the dysfunction because that's where you're putting your energy. And so the point is that no matter where you're ready to go into the next level, you have to go into giving your time and attention to something that is beyond what you just said, Elle. Amazing.
I love that. What are some other things we need to think about in terms of healing from trauma, or any of the topics we've discussed so far that might come up for you if you're thinking of an example, whether it be abundance or something else we need to look at here?
I love that. Yeah, I think that, everybody's searching. Everyone's searching for meaning. And I think especially right now, people are probably like, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to keep my job? Or maybe they're already entrepreneurs and they're questioning, am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to sustain this and everything? And I'm a true believer. And even working with top CEOs, we're doing the same core work. We do the same core work, whether I'm working with someone who's a beginner entrepreneur, a huge CEO, any of it, we're doing the same exact work, which is always clearing out the subconscious mind from the traumas, number one. Secondly, we're birthing their truth. So we want to get clear of what your core values are, not what the culture told you should value, right? None of that, getting clear of what really matters for you. And what happens for people is it's actually through the trauma work that they birth their life purpose statement. They birth their purpose because what happens is you didn't go through the suffering you went through in this lifetime and your lineage for nothing, right? Yeah, right? Nothing. You went through it because you had a divine appointment. And you are universal law. You are that thing that's neutralizing that in the collective. And when you heal from it, there's a responsibility at a soul level, not in a bad way, in a beautiful way, a responsibility of rising up and bringing those takeaways, bringing those lessons, bringing that wisdom, bringing all that to the world and helping other people that are struggling with what you went through. So this is the most beautiful thing. So anyone out there, I think that more than anything, if you're going to do a business plan, if you're thinking about moving, if you're doing any kind of big decision, you have to get clear of what really matters to you and getting clear of what that core one thing is that you're really here to bring to the world. And when you have that, you don't look to the world, because when you look to the world, you get overwhelmed. You get confused. If you go on social media or you start getting so overwhelmed and confused, but when you come from a generation, you're generating from your heart and from your solar plexus and from your consciousness to the world, what your intention is, who you are for the world, then it gets easy. It gets super easy.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, the two seemingly horrible things that happened to me in life, I've written 2 books about, help
Mm-hmm.
people and inspire others for it. And as I say, sometimes the best gifts in life come wrapped in shit. You got to give it a minute. Being open to the fact that it could have meaning or be there for a purpose of which you cannot see yet. Again, that unknown. And it took a minute, but my gosh, when I look back, and I'm sure you would say the same thing about some of the things that happened to you. And this is why people say breast cancer was the best thing that ever happened, or whatever the thing was. I get it. I don't know that I would take back either of those experiences for what they brought me in a million ways, and then what they get to bring others, right? So that makes total sense that you would get through and deal with your trauma, and somehow a purpose would be birthed from that.
Right.
I
It's
love
kind of
it.
like it's kind of like the Chinese handcuffs. The Chinese handcuffs, you have them on your fingers and you try and pull your fingers out to try and get out. But every time you pull your fingers, it actually gets tighter and you can't pull them out. The only way to release from the Chinese handcuffs is actually to push your fingers together, and it releases the handcuffs. So it's a counterintuitive process. Many people go, well, that happened in the past. I don't want to deal with that. Let's just stay positive. Let's just move on. But the issue is that the real gems come when you actually go back into that. There's wisdom. Trauma minus emotions equals wisdom. So I invite you, if you're listening, to do, I'm sure many of you guys are already doing the work, do even more of your trauma work. And there's so much wisdom to be born out of it. It's the most beautiful thing to witness for people.
Tell us about how, first of all, you offer so many great free things for everybody through your website, through your social media. Tell us though, what you offer us, because we can be certified coaches through you. We can get certified in your E4 trauma method. Tell us the ways that people listening out there, either from a coach standpoint or just a person on the street who's like, I need to get this, figured out. Tell us all the ways in which we can connect with you and learn from you.
We have very inexpensive, some programs that are really just learning self-processing and learning all the transformational work to begin to really understand the deep, deep work. We also have programs to help get certified and trained in the E4 trauma method, which is a method that why I got the 2020 Walden Wisdom Award next to Oprah, which is so flattering. And also as a master's spiritual psychology coach, getting trained in a bunch of processes to help clients and yourself birth your truth, getting clear of all those things like your core values, how to deal with quandaries, how to get really clear of what you're committed to, how to deal with creating boundaries, healthy boundaries, all those basics that we all need to learn. Also, we train and develop spiritual practitioners, and spiritual practitioners are masters of understanding universal law and really being a miracle of listening for themselves and for clients. And then we also teach teachers and ministers of metaphysics. We don't believe in a man in the sky. We believe in the source within. And then we also finally are just opening up our Doctor of Divinity program. We're actually doing a research project on trauma, on E4 trauma in epigenetics, whether you call it past lives or your lineage, and then people birth their own books or, something to the world. So it is such an honor, Elle. You have no idea. Like this, I've been pinching myself. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot of work. There's hard parts to it as well, but it's so fulfilling, as you know, all this work.
Dream come true. Yeah, that's lovely. It's amazing what you've created since, co-hosting the show. You created Good Morning La La Land. And I just love following on social media. And like I said before, you are one of the only podcasts that I regularly tune into. Tell us where we can find you. We'll put everything in the show notes, but give us the direct line if someone's listening and they need to get on this.
I so appreciate you. Yeah. I mean, my podcast, you can look up Dr. Erin, just DR and then ERIN across any Google will pull it up. And that's a good one because you're actually, I teach all the distinctions. So you can totally dive into everything from the 12 series on money breakthrough to a bunch of subconscious reprogramming series, all universal laws. I have a 52 universal law deck that's actually just coming out. So all that, like people love the podcast. Other than that, we do have a lot of gifts on the website. So if you go to New Thought Global, actually, we've been New Thought Global and Society forever, but we swapped the website out to actually New Thought Global. And because it's our lineage and we're proud of it. And then, you're welcome to come in. We do have some free trainings also usually on the website as well. And we can be friends on social media. It's just drerin.tv, which is dr.erin, drerin.tv. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks again. We've had so many great conversations over the years. I love sharing you with our audience and all of your work. And again, and you have hundreds of episodes on the podcast. So like you said, for free, you can really go in there and get a feel for Dr. Erin and her work and also really learn a lot. And It's so soothing. I love listening. I love it too, that when my, people I know in this world, right, we have podcasts and I'm like, oh, I'm going to go listen to Dr.
And I'm so
Erin
proud of you,
right
Elle.
now.
Elle, I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad that you're doing your podcast. And you are such a wealth of wisdom. I always tell people that, but you're so much more than that. You're one of those genuinely authentic, badass women that as a woman, I feel so safe around you. I don't feel like there's status versus this versus how many likes, how many, like all that. You are so authentic. And I just really, really, really want to recognize you. And I love you.
Oh, thank you so much. You as well. And also, Dr. Erin and I are both on a wonderful summit called the Ageless Women Summit, right? That's coming up. And so I'll put the link to that in the show notes. And that is a really incredible group of people. And you mentioned The Secret, including Marie Diamond, who's from The Secret. She's on there as well. So definitely go check that out. That's a wonderful, event online with incredible speakers, including Dr. Erin. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there any last bits of wisdom or anything you'd like to leave our audience?
I got nothing more, girl. That's it. I just want to say thank you guys for, taking time for yourself. Cause I know that this is really an investment in yourself, your time. And I know that whatever you're seeking, you will find. Knock and the door will be opened for sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And to everyone else, we'll see you next week. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture. And it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products. And I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.